Hi, I'm Ross Purnell, editor and publisher of Fly Fisherman Magazine. Welcome to Loop, where we make deeper connections with the people behind the magazine. We're sponsored today by G. Loomis, American-made fly rods manufactured in Woodland, Washington. We're also sponsored by our friends at Patagonia. Check out their new line of Swift Current waders. There are the Traverse model and Expedition model. Both are made with recycled material and are PFAS-free to keep our waterways clear of forever chemicals. Today we are joined by fly tire extraordinaire, YouTube personality, and book author Tim Cammisa. Welcome.
Thank you, Ross. It's an honor to be in the hallowed offices of Fly Fisherman Magazine.
It's good to have you here. You're just on your way to the Lancaster Fly Fishing Show. I thought it would be a great opportunity to get you in the studio. Sometimes people don't understand how big of a state Pennsylvania is. It is a big state, so getting you in this corner of the state, it was good to take advantage of your knowledge and expertise and have you. You're one of the first people in this studio. This is only our third podcast.
Well, big shout out to Dennis. He did an awesome job. We spoke with him just a little bit ago, and I said to him, and when you're ready to come to Western Pennsylvania and set this studio up in my room, you're more than welcome to. Dennis did a great job here.
He did the design of the studio, and he's the creative director of the magazine. He makes everything look good, makes everything better.
We all need somebody like that in our lives.
Yeah, he's a good person to have. Yeah. So we're going to talk about your books, your YouTube channel, fly tying. But one of the main goals of this podcast is to learn a little more about the background of people and, little known stuff that we wouldn't put in the magazine. So let's get started on how you became a fly tyer. How did you get started in fly tying?
Man, that's a good question, Ross. I guess my backstory is a little different than others because it seems like in fly fishing, for so many, fly fishing came first. But for me, it was actually fly tying. My parents signed me up for an after-school fly tying class when I was 10 years old. I was a fourth grader, and there was this opportunity where my school offered maybe 6 or 8 different classes after school once a week. And my parents thought fly tying would be a really neat one for me. I didn't know what it was. It just seemed like a craft or something. I showed up, and there's a bunch of us sitting in the room, and all of a sudden, these gentlemen walked in. By gentlemen, the kinds with beards, they reeked of mothballs. They carry these weird glues and varnishes with them. And I was engaged from the first moment they walked into the room. And that first class, I'll never forget, they had these vices with them and they put the hooks in them and they had a spinning deer hair. And I was all in after that. It was just so cool to spin deer hair, create these, I don't know, I wouldn't call them bass bugs, but you just had fun making these everyday materials turned into life. I was trying to make a mouse for my first one. And the joy for me was taking the razor blade, just sliding it across the deer hair just exploding all over the place. And that kind of had me hooked, as the pun goes. I hadn't yet known that you're going to use these to catch fish. I'm sure they mentioned it at the time, but to me, as a little, 10-year-old, it just was a challenge to try to turn nothing into something.
To me, spinning deer hair is kind of like PhD level. Yes. That's a weird place for to get a kid started, and a messy place.
Oh, very messy. There was stuff all over the place. It was just a blast. I think that's probably the side that they really figured out with kids. For me, as a teacher now, it's like go with a woolly bugger or a mop fly, something that's going to catch fish right away. But I think for these fly tyers that were teaching us, they just wanted us to get engaged and be interested. And spinning deer hair, you're right. It's not easy, but it's high interest. And whenever you get to cut that stuff and just get messy, I was all in.
Yeah, I remember the first time I ever did that. It's like, wow, I didn't think it would do that.
It's so cool, though.
It's very strange.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's how you got started fly tying. How'd you take it to the next level? How'd you put it into practice and get started actually fishing?
Well, it still relates to that class. Around maybe the third or fourth class, where everything's going as normal. All of us kids are kind of waiting. School ends, and the fly tyers, they came in afterwards. And I'm looking at the group, and all of a sudden I realize, hey, I know that guy. That's my great Uncle John. I'm like, what's he doing here? I thought he was maybe coming to watch me tie flies. I knew him outside of school, outside of fly fishing. I'm Catholic. And, he was there for so many parts of my Catholic journey, if you want to call it. He was my first communion sponsor. So to see him in that atmosphere, it was kind of strange. And I later learned that my Uncle John in Western Pennsylvania, he was kind of a known figure in fly fishing. He was, just an extraordinary fly tyer. He concentrated on, old wet flies and Catskill dries. And he also worked for the Fish Commission. He patrolled, various areas, various waterways around Western Pennsylvania. So he walks with these other fly tyers. He sees me, he kind of waves at me, and he comes over, and next thing I know, he's saying, "Hey, get these flies ready. I'm going to take you fishing come the spring." And I was really excited because that was when I started to build that connection. Like, we're going to catch fish with these things. So I, kept tying. I had this old tackle box where I kept all the flies that I created during that class. And then around Christmas time, my Uncle John had set up, my family with the right stuff for me to get. My dad was into fishing. He used a fly rod as well, but he loved to fish minnows with his fly rod. So he was a fly angler many years before, but at that point he was really into hunting. He had bird dogs. My mom was into the outdoors, or she still is into the outdoors, but there was just not that fly fishing connection. So my Uncle John comes along. He got them to buy me a 7.5 foot 5-weight. I still have that rod. He got me my first fly reel. It was an old Martin reel. I think they called them the tuna can reels because they look like a tuna can. Just this cheap little reel. The worst part of that purchase was the fly line. They got me a really cheap fly line. And I'm not going to blame my early casting on that fly line, but if I could throw something under the bus, that's what I would throw. And come spring, sure enough, my Uncle John, he called and he was like, "All right, it's time. We're going to be going fishing next weekend." And my cousin came along and his good friend Doc Bolin, he took us out fly fishing for the first time for trout. Now that was when I first had like a mentor with me. But if I guess what I would tell the truth, this is the first time I really share this with other people, is that prior to that, I couldn't wait for that first day. And we actually had a farm pond, connected to my neighborhood. And I would go there and I would catch bluegills and just try out different patterns on those fish, not realizing bluegills would eat anything. I thought I was like this great angler because here I am just slaying these fish every time I went out. One time I was lucky enough to hook a bluegill and I'm fighting it and a largemouth bass came by and just slammed this. It was so awesome. And, sure enough, the day came for me to go trout fishing. And wow, that was a surprise for me because there's a steep learning curve when it comes to fly fishing for trout. And I was in for it that day.
At least you had the opportunity to get started on a bass pond. I mean, that's my big recommendation to anyone that's like, "Hey, I want to get my kids started fly fishing. How do I do it?" It's like, take them fishing for bluegill. Like, that is definitely the way to get started. That's how I got my kids started. Some people don't have that opportunity, but that's definitely the place to go.
No, that's for sure. We had a blast. I mean, looking back, those were some of my favorite moments. Growing up, having those opportunities to fish warm water, especially. We have a little reservoir that was by my parents' house, and it was known to have really, really large population of crappie. And man, I love to go down there and fish for those with around a 7.5 foot fiberglass fly rod. I think it was a Phillipson, this beautiful amber color. And I would throw black ghosts, and those fish just loved anything with the color white in it. They would just slam that black ghost. So just fighting like crappie and some bass and bluegill, that was just so much fun, prior to my trout days, if you want to call it that.
That's a super classic setup, actually.
It was.
It's interesting you had such amazing mentorship and teachers and stuff because, you had people that really brought you along. And was that an influence in you becoming a teacher? I mean, you had great teachers to get started and you became a teacher. What was it? What was that transition?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm not really sure what prompted that. I know whenever it came time to think about careers, I was fortunate at my high school. They had this thing where you had the opportunity to take a day or a half a day of school and you could follow somebody out and follow them around in their job. And, we had some guidance counselors that gave us some, ideas. We took some tests and a couple ideas came out of that and a couple career pathways. And none of them really just jumped out. It didn't really scream like, "Hey, this is what you should do for the rest of your life." Because it's a pretty big decision you have to make whenever you're that young. And one of them was a teacher. And I thought, well, this could be kind of cool. But I didn't have anyone to ask about whenever it came to teaching. No one in my family was a teacher. Both my parents worked for the post office. I had a great uncle, Mike, who was a teacher at my high school. But he and I didn't have a really strong connection. So nothing screamed teaching. And I went out. I observed a teacher for a half a day in another school and just really loved it. Just saw the interactions they have with the students, with the other staff members. And then, came the kind of big three reasons why a lot of people become a teacher. And it's June, July, and August. You got your summers off. And at that time, I'm 16 years old, 17 years old, and I just was in love with fly fishing. I mean, I was the person, whenever my dad said, what do you want to do over the winter? I'm like, we should go to Maryland. There's this big fly fishing show. And he would take me to the show and see all these fly fishing celebrities. And I would show up with my little notebook and just write everything down and just figure out what are the hot flies to use for this season and just pick their brains and learn the casts. So whenever I had that chance to say, man, I could pick a profession and I can still fish a lot, education was kind of a draw.
Well, that's amazing that you went from attending the fly fishing shows to being a presenter and a speaker at the fly fishing shows. What's one of the earliest memories you had of like when you were a kid going to the shows? What was it like back then?
Man, I mean, I'm not going to say a lot hasn't changed because they're completely different. At the time, I remember first walking into a show and I was just blown away by the size. Because you're just seeing this show and there's just so much going on. There's all these booths with, really far away destinations. Like to me, that was a huge takeaway at the time. I'm like, people fly fish around the world. At me, I was just this little boy from Western Pennsylvania learning about all these other destinations. And then I remember walking Fly Tyers Row and, being there as a child, those fly tires really, really made a difference in my life because as you walk by, I would ask them questions. They would engage me. And every now and then someone would hand me a fly. I'll never forget. I think it's Jay Fishy Fulham. He handed me this crayfish fly. I still have the fly. I was like, oh my gosh, can you believe he gave this fly to me? Like that really made an impact on my life. And then probably the one that stands out the most, at one point, I wanted to see some of the fly casters. And there's a legend there. His name's Lefty Kreh. I'm pretty sure most people probably have heard of him before. And I had just kind of been exposed to Lefty and just finding out a little bit about him. I didn't know his history or anything like that. But we had gone to a Lefty Kreh presentation, and man, was he engaging. He just had you laughing. He had you interested. He made it so you wanted to go out and fish the next day. And after his presentation, we found out he was going to be doing a casting demonstration. So I said to my dad, let's go watch Lefty Kreh cast. And we went over and we waited, and eventually he showed up at this pond because in these fishing shows, they set up ponds for the anglers to cast too. So here we are, we're waiting. We had a primo spot and Lefty starts his demonstration. And he just had the whole crowd just ready. We were laughing, we were engaged. And then finally he says these words that changed my life. And he's like, who wants to come out here and be my model for this casting demonstration? And my dad pushed me forward. And I'm like, I think I can do this. So here I am standing next to Lefty Kreh. And he introduces me to the crowd and he asks if I'd make a couple casts. And I'm like, I'm going to show this guy just how good I can cast. And I make, my back cast, my forward cast, and I go back again and he grabs my arm and he turns to the audience. He said, everybody, I would like to introduce you to the Statue of Liberty. And I was so embarrassed and I realized my arm is up real high and I'm like, oh no. And, it was at that time, I didn't even realize, here I am getting instruction from one of the best, fly casting instructors of all time. And I'm just embarrassed and so ticked off at my dad because I'm a teenager. Now looking back, just what an impressionable moment that made for him to actually help me while also teaching the audience too. And he did. He improved my casting that day.
You go to the shows and he was just helping people almost all the time, but extra pressure to get up there and do it in front of the crowd.
Oh my God. It was terrible as a child, yeah.
What an awesome memory.
It was,
He had like a magnetic personality and just the way he unrolled the fly line, I could never stop watching it.
No, you and me both.
Magical.
Yeah, you and me both.
So what happened next?
Gosh, in my, I guess related to fly fishing, that's the direction we're going. Sometime in that time frame, as I was a teenager, I got an invitation from a really good friend of mine. He was another fly fishing mentor. His name is John Dunn. And John Dunn, he asked if I wanted to go to Montana and fish for a month on the Missouri River. And I was like, absolutely. I didn't know anything about the Missouri, but I knew about Montana. At that time, that was right after the movie had come out, and for all the people listening and watching on YouTube by the movie, you know what movie we're talking about.
The river runs through it.
That's it.
The movie.
Yeah,
There's only one.
There's only one. I mean, luckily, I had been involved in fly fishing before the movie, and then that movie came, and it just especially for me being young. That just exploded things. And of course, the movie's in Montana. So here I am. I got the opportunity to go to Montana. I said yes to John. And I saved up money. I worked some odd jobs that summer. And he took me to Montana, and we fished the Missouri. Now, when we got there, the river was still running really high. They hadn't yet lowered it yet to those perfect levels for dry flies. But we fished some spring creeks. We fished, all around the state. I didn't really know much of the rivers we were fishing. I just knew we were catching fish, and I was enjoying it. And then he got a call from a buddy that the Missouri's on, like the Mo's ready. Let's get over there. And we showed up at the Missouri. And the way that we had kind of worked out that trip, John had a van that we drove out. He had this little trailer that he was pulling behind it. I think it was a Scamp. And then we had a couple of float boats. So every day, one of us would get dropped off by the other person, and then we'd float that river. And the other person would go down. We'd have a bike set up at the bottom for them, and they would float down to the bike and ride the bike back up. So we would kind of take turns as to who's riding the bike. It was just
what a
incredible.
system.
Oh, we had John's. He's always been a next level thinker. But
what do you mean by a float boat?
We had like those little float tubes. We had those little
float tube.
Yeah, like a personal, like a little watercraft.
I remember when people used to tube the Missouri.
Yeah. Oh, it was. I mean, there were no drift boats back then. I'm not saying there were none, but there were very few drift boats. There were a few that I'd see throughout the day. But if I was floating the Missouri, I might come across 3 or 4 of the boats. At some point, they were like, "Oh, the boats are coming." But whenever they said like the boats are coming in, you'd get like 10 or 15 boats. That was boat traffic back then. So it was just awesome to have. I mean, imagine here I am in my late teens. I have the entire Missouri River to myself. There were days that it was tough because I'm there with John, yet I'm not fishing with him throughout the day. So I'd have to figure things out on my own. Here I am on the boat, getting my butt kicked, realizing I can't cast that good in the wind. And I had to figure it out. Like I see this brown trout eating bugs over there. I got to figure out a way to get over to that fish, get a cast in front of them and not spook the fish. And that's not an easy thing to do whenever you're at that age. So if we get back at night, I'd pick his brain and say, hey, I was in this situation. The wind's this way. What should I have done? How could I get to that fish differently? And some days I would say, I want to do that drift again tomorrow so I could kind of retime things out because, whenever you're on one of those little boats, once you get past a spot, you're not getting back to it. So, there'd be times I'd go past a pod of risers and realize, man, those were my fish for that day. I got to figure out how to time myself a little bit better the next day.
They do group up a lot, and that river's loaded with fish, but a lot of flat water and really challenging fish, even back then.
Oh, for sure.
I mean,
oh my gosh,
you cannot make mistakes.
No, I mean there were just blanket hatches of caddisfly. I'll just never forget those, just breathing in caddisflies. We had some PMD action. We had a ton of trichos as well. Like trichos were really something those fish seemed to key on. A few days we did some nymph fishing. And then as like a little surprise, at one point, my great uncle John, my mentor from fly tying, he showed up with my aunt and they had been doing a trip. They were fishing the Madison and a few other places and they were just driving around and they met up with us and we got our hands on a drift boat. So we floated the Missouri together, one day. We had a blast. I mean, that was probably my most memorable day of the trip. I hooked my largest brown trout of the trip. No pictures of it because it got off. We just couldn't land it. We didn't have a net to a large enough landing net for it. It was just one of those moments. I'm like, I have a picture of myself with this bent rod. I just couldn't get the fish in it anymore. So just one of those experiences that just stuck with me forever. And we got back from that trip. And at some point when we got back, this is how I'll connect the office back into this story. In the mail, I was a longtime subscriber to the Fly Fisherman magazine, and the newest issue of Fly Fisherman shows up, and on the cover it says something like, the Delaware River is the Missouri of the East. And I'm like, man, I had just fallen in love with the Missouri. I had said to myself, I should probably be a teacher because I was looking up the average salary in Montana and saying, like, if I make X salary as a teacher in Montana, I'm going to be living pretty decent in that state. I think I can do this. And now I'm finding out like there's a river, within about a 6-hour drive of me that's maybe as good as the Missouri River. It's the Delaware. Let me go check this out. It's another tailwater. Let's figure out that system. And by this point, it's the summertime, and a couple weeks after getting the magazine, I load up my truck and I take a drive out. Just go out and just say, I'm going to see how this river is. I had a little boat that I brought out with me, a little tube. I shouldn't say a tube, Ross. It was one of the boats that had an aluminum frame, if you remember those ones. So I had oars as well. I could wear my flippers if I wanted to, but I mainly just used my oars, and it was an aluminum frame with the bladder system.
Okay.
So super heavy to carry around, just a pain. I still have one of those. I don't use that style anymore. But I got there, and I remember I spent the first day just driving up and down the west branch of the Delaware, just with my binoculars and just scoping it out and just saying, like, where could the fish be? And I found like riffles, and I found pools, and I'd find rising fish. I had a little map. I was just notorious for using topographical maps, and I would just mark where I found all the fish. And then after a while, I'm like, all right, I think I found a few places to fish, and I just went all in and just started chasing those fish and just doing everything in my power to catch them.
Yeah, the analogy of the Missouri and the Delaware is a good one in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways that I like the structure of the Delaware a little more. I mean, the Missouri doesn't have a lot of the riffle run pool type structure. The West Branch really does have that.
Yeah, it does.
You know, that character. I really love it. So did you fall in love with the Delaware, or what happened? What happened there?
I did, and in fact, I will say, kind of like what you're talking about with the Missouri. One of the greatest pieces of advice I got in my life related to fishing came from John Dunn when we got back from Montana. And he said something really clear. He's like, remember, Montana's Montana and Pennsylvania's Pennsylvania. And just know that every place you fish is going to be different. It's really tough to draw too many comparisons. But here I am on the Delaware, and I'm like, I'm loving this place. I was able to really just do a deep dive with dry flies and emergers. I did some nymph fishing that summer, but I just remember there was so much moss in the water that every time I would get my drifts through, if I had any knots in my leader or my tippet, there was just moss connected to it. So I thought, I'm just gonna really just go crazy with dry flies and emergers. So I stayed out there for about 5 days, and then I feel like every week I'd come home for a few days, and then I'd ask a friend, hey, do you want to go fish the Delaware? Because I needed an excuse to keep going back. And I just kept finding people who wanted to just keep going back with me. And I brought my Uncle John out there and some friends. And then one day, a good friend of mine, his name is Jim Lukes. He's since passed, but he's another mentor of mine that was probably quadruple my age at the time. And I said to Jim, like, hey, do you want to go out? And he's like, yeah, let's go. And we went out and we went fishing. And literally the first day we got there, it was just one of those lights out days of fishing where we just, I went to the spots. I had everything dialed in. I knew where the fish were going to be. I had the flies. I had the casts. I had the leaders. I basically was guiding him at the time. And we just had a field day with those brown trout and just loved it. Everything was great. We fished into the kind of the late afternoon. And at some point, we just said, let's take a break. In those little towns like Deposit and Hancock, there was always a good pizza shop. So we went up, we grabbed some pizza and some garlic knots. And there's fly shops, of course. You got to go to the local fly shop, and we're hanging out in there. And there's these guys that they're just talking about their day. Just how's your day going? We're getting ready for the evening hatch. And this one guy, he's talking. He's saying, I had a great day. I got like 2 or 3 fish. It was just an awesome day in the Delaware. And Jim's like, what are you talking about? Awesome day. He's like, that sounds terrible. And the guy's like, what do you mean? He's like, these are really tough fish. And Jim's like, well, not for Timmy. Like he's caught a ton out here. He's been coming here all summer. We caught like 20 fish already today. And the guy's like, you guys didn't catch 20 fish. And you could just see by the looks in their face, he's looking at me like this, teenager. And he's like, there's no way this kid caught this many fish that Jim's telling him. And the fly shop owner's there. And eventually, the crowd kind of disappeared. And the owner says to us, hey, you guys want to go fishing? I have some time tomorrow if you want to go out. And we're like, yeah. And I'm like, here's where I'm thinking about going tomorrow. So we kind of set up a little time to meet him. I'm like, this is pretty cool. We get to fish with a fly shop owner. Like, it's a big deal for me.
Cool.
So we go out there and we just crush the fish. And after, like 3 or 4 hours, the owner looks at me and he's like, would you ever consider guiding out here? And I'm like, you want me to guide for you? Like, I was blown. I'm like, 100%. Here I am, like about to get into teaching. I'm going to have my summers off and I have a gig as a guide in the summer. I was like, this is officially the life.
What was the ticket like? What were you doing different with the 20 fish?
I'd love to tell you I knew what I could really just put it into one thing. It wasn't one thing. I think it was a variety of like things that I was getting right. Number one, I was using super long leaders and long tippet. I came from that school, like from central Pennsylvania, where I can just like think about Joe Humphrey's book where he talked about George Harvey and the slack leader. So you're making these casts with this leader that's not completely opening up and it's just putting S curves all through it. So I was really concerned about micro drag at that time that I learned about from the Missouri. So there's like step one. I have not a fast action fly rod. I can think of the fly rods that everyone was throwing at those days. And I was using softer fly rods with really light tippets. So we're talking 7X at the time. But I knew my fly rods weren't going to snap off whenever I set the hook because I had a little softer tip. Then whenever I think about some of the flies I was using, I was trying my best to think like outside the box. If everyone's throwing Parachute Adams at that time, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to throw anything like that. So I really dug deep into, my knowledge of flies. I was throwing stuff like Parasol and Emergers. It would be this little fly that basically was a pheasant tail that had a little piece of monofilament coming out of it or a little piece of fluorocarbon, and it had a little antron post, something really tiny, something really delicate, that when it landed, all I would see on the surface was the post, but the fish were seeing like a floating pheasant tail. Because I'm thinking, there's no way these fish are keying on duns. Like, why would they key on duns when they have all these vulnerable emergers going on? And I knew just enough about entomology to make me just a hair dangerous. But I knew that whenever I'm seeing these fish and they were just sipping and I couldn't see the bugs, you could argue, oh, they're eating no-see-ums. But I'm like, they're not eating no-see-ums. They're eating something like right in the film or under the surface. So I was kind of getting lucky with that. And then whenever I saw fish that were really doing the sipping, which kind of indicates they're eating a dry fly, I was throwing small stuff like tiny Griffith's nets, just flies that I thought I could get away with. But I was also making sure like I didn't have anything showing on my tippet. So I would put that mud on it. So I made sure my tippet wasn't floating on the surface. Yeah, I was staying back real far from the fish. Just, I don't know. I felt like I was making the right decisions. And I was also willing to walk. I mean, I knew all the access points. I'd figured them out my first season. And I was willing to figure out, like, if I got to this spot here, I could still draw it on a map today, Ross. Like, the only people who could get to that spot without putting in a good half an hour of walking was going to be somebody in a boat. So I knew that I was also able to find some fish that not everyone else was able to find.
Why is it such an amazing dry fly river? Is it just the insect hatches?
It's got to be.
Tell me if I'm full of it, but
Yeah.
my experience on the Delaware is I have very limited success streamer fishing or nymphing fishing like I would anywhere else. You kind of have to wait for the hatch and catch those fish rising. That's very distinctive.
For sure. I mean, I think there's something to be said about the fact that it's a tailwater. So we have to start with that. I mean, even if you look at sections of the East Branch has such cold water because they're both tailwater fisheries. The water that's kind of stored in the dam is used to supply New York City. So you have that option. The flows can be really hit or miss there, that's another tricky aspect of the summers because, they really prioritize getting water to the city over fly fishers or over, anglers. That's not their number one priority there. So we have all those kind of issues at play. But whenever you look at it, you have this abundance of cold water, and then you have a ton of trout that are coming from this system that could be miles long, but they come up for that cold water knowing that if they can find that right temperature, because there is that kind of magic temperature that those mayflies really seem to just hatch around, somewhere around like that 56 degrees seems to be, that was always that number that came into my head. But if you could find that spot where everything kind of lined up, those fish were ready to eat. But like you're saying, if you look back at that, the best opportunity for most anglers is right at dusk. That's when those fish just seem to they would light up the water. But you only had so much time because once that fog rolled in, or once everything started to shift there, and things just cooled off immensely. That was it. Once those bugs disappeared, those fish would just shut down. There's some other nighttime tactics that you could use, but dry fly wise, that was it.
Such a tricky, fascinating place.
It is.
So you're a school teacher, you're a guide, you're spending all your time teaching people how to fly fish, sharing your knowledge. How do you make the leap into the YouTube world and showing people how to fish and tie flies there?
Yeah, I guess I am a YouTuber. At some point as I was guiding, I kind of started saying to myself, this is a tough gig because, 9.5 months out of the year I'm teaching, that's my day job still to this day. I teach sixth graders, 11 and 12-year-olds, love my job. I'm in charge of the fly fishing club, but that's, teaching is a pretty demanding profession. And then all summer long, I'd set myself up for these summers, but here I am. If you came to this shop and you wanted to catch a brown trout on a dry fly or a emerger, I'm your guide. You're dedicating a day out there with those individuals. And man, I loved it. I loved teaching people about emergers and doing all those intricacies. But here I am, I could just visualize myself going down the river one day. I'm on the oars and I think to myself, I want to be the guy getting pushed, not the guy pushing the oars. How do I kind of flip this script? And that was right around the time when YouTube was becoming popular. And I thought, all right, let's just give this YouTube thing a shot. I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about thumbnails, titles. All I knew was that in the wintertime, I tied flies. And for me, it's pretty easy to say I can set up a stationary camera, a camcorder at the time. I can zoom in on the fly and I can just tie the flies that I knew. And that's literally how the start came. I had no name of my channel. I had no idea where it was going to lead me. It was just, I love fly fishing. I love the fly fishing community. I like to tie flies. I'm going to just share some of my patterns with others and some of the patterns that had been shared with me. So I started off really as just doing a deep dive and just giving lots of information about the patterns I love to tie. I was not and still am not an expert on any of those things. I just love sharing them. And I remember posting my first video and just kind of sitting back and saying, wonder what's going to happen now, and hitting the refresh button and waiting to see if somebody's going to watch the video. And then eventually I learned if I copied the YouTube link and I sent it to everybody I knew on email, more people would watch the video, and maybe that would help encourage more people to watch and encourage more views over the time. And I just kept, getting fascinated with how YouTube worked, where at some point I eventually grew to 50 subscribers. 50 people clicked the button to say, I can't wait for Tim to come out with another video. And then it was 100, and then 500. And each of those milestones, it just grew for me. And it was just fascinating to know that people were connected to what I was doing. People from all around the world. It wasn't just people in Western Pennsylvania anymore. It's fly tyers in Sweden, fly tyers in Italy, people out in the West Coast in California. And they're emailing me and messaging me and leaving comments on my channel. And I don't know, that fascination still to this day, it's a really cool experience.
So fly fishing's just a community.
Yeah, sure.
You built a good one.
Yeah, I got lucky. I would say built. Like I said, I knew nothing about it. I mean, for anyone out there who's thinking about doing it, I say do it. There's no reason not to do it. I'm not saying don't get into it without a plan like I did. I had no idea I was going to have this channel that was going to lead me to books and trips. And I'm sitting in the office of Fly Fisherman magazine now. To me, again, looking back, the 12-year-old me or 10-year-old me or 13-year-old me would just be blown away as to where just a couple decisions in life have led me.
In the beginning, did you focus on Catskills style flies, or was there a specialty, or?
Gosh, that's a good question, Ross. I'd love to go back and look at my first 6 or 7 videos, but I think it was just flies that I knew. I mean, the woolly bugger, that was a favorite. I remember
those flies you fished
with.
The
flies I fished. It's there was this foam fly that was called the spider that I love to use for dry dropper. So why would I not share that one? With the Griffith's gnat, I'd guide it with the Griffith's gnat. So why not show that fly? And why not show that you don't have to tie it just the way they used to in Michigan? You can also put an antron or a polywing, and then you can actually see it. You're not going to feel blind throwing a size 22. Some of my guide flies at the time, those never made the YouTube channel. I was like, I can't share these with anybody. I've since kind of shifted my philosophy into sharing. But I know at the time it was I'll share some flies, but I still have to hold a few things back.
And so you gained some traction on YouTube, got some notoriety as a fly tyer, and next thing you know, I see that you're presenting and speaking at fly fishing shows. How did that come about?
Gosh, that was a crazy ride, because at the time, as I'm releasing these YouTube videos, I had no plan. There was no I wonder where this could lead me. There was nothing for my path. It was just, I'm a teacher. I'm releasing these YouTube videos, mainly fly tying, and let's just see where this heads. And I was just all in with those, and I started getting emails and phone calls from now a good friend, Chuck Furimsky. And Chuck Furimsky started the original fly fishing show, and he also runs the International Fly Tying Symposium, and he's seeing these videos, and he's like, hey, I think you do a great job presenting at one of my shows. And I'm like, no, I don't know. I just almost felt like he was pulling my leg. I would talk to him on the phone, he would invite me, and I just didn't feel that I was ready for that, just ready for that experience, because here I'm just this kid from Western Pennsylvania. I'm just sharing flies that I fish. I know nothing about presenting or anything along those lines. And Chuck kept calling. He would call one year and he would follow up with an email, and then he would call again. And finally I realized I don't think he's going to stop. So I better figure this presenting thing out. And there was a local club in the Pittsburgh area called Tri-County Trout Club. And I can't remember if they contacted me or I contacted them. And I said, hey, I'd like to share a presentation with your group. Would you be interested? And they're like, absolutely. And I shared my first presentation with them. I'll never forget the president, Steve. I asked him afterwards, could you just send me an email of what you think I could do to make it better? Because I really wanted to make it as good as possible. And he gave me a bunch of great ideas, some great feedback. And then I contacted Chuck and I was like, hey, you've been calling me for the last couple of years. I think I'm ready. And Chuck invited me to the International Fly Tying Symposium. I was there as a fly tyer. So, I'm sitting on the show floor. People are coming around. They're recognizing me from the videos. That was just mind-blowing because I'm sitting next to somebody like Tim Flagler and I'm hearing his voice and I'm thinking, I've watched his videos for years and I can just picture him. And now I have people coming up to me saying the same thing, like, damn, I put on your video right before I go to bed and I listen to your voice all night long. And I'm like, this is really creepy,
That's
man.
really
and
creepy.
You shouldn't be saying this with your wife standing next to you. Something's not, but I'm hearing that. I'm like, oh my, this is like, it was wild. And Chuck had me give some presentations and I loved that. That was just awesome, having a room full of people who want to learn. Because here I am, I'm an elementary school teacher. I have 25 students in their desks that are dying to get out and play recess. They want to play football or socialize. And now I have 100 people in a room that just want to learn about fly fishing and fly tying. That blew me away. And then the last thing Chuck had booked me to do was to tie flies at what they call the featured tire. So you're up, you're tying your flies, and you have a giant monitor next to you. And every single thread wrap, they're going to see. If you make any mistake, they're going to see it. And here I am. I'm in front of my first large crowd. I'm winding my thread. I'm just saying to myself, don't break your thread. Don't break your thread. Because I'm thinking back to when I was a little boy and I had watched A.K. Best. I'll never forget watching A.K. Best, and he's tying these just beautiful patterns years ago. And then he broke his thread. And I was like, the great A.K. Best broke his thread. Now I'm like, I don't want to break my thread either. So, just having that early experience, man, it was surreal is the word. Even to this day, whenever, I'll be at the Lancaster show this weekend, and I'll be honest, Ross, before I go into every presentation, there's a board outside that has your name and your time and the title of your presentation. And I just look at it. I just can't believe that it's actually my name there. It just blows me away still.
I love the A.K. Best mention. Yeah. He was one of my idols at one time. I had an A.K. Best Vice. Did you ever have an
I've
A.K.
seen
Best?
Them. No.
Oh, yeah. I tied on one of those for years. I wish I still had that.
Oh, my God.
That was so cool.
Very cool.
So you started presenting and doing all the shows. How did you get into the book publishing business? It seems like your audience is growing. First, at one point you're teaching one-on-one as a guide. Then you're doing presentations to small groups and big, social media. Your first book was Fly Tying for Everyone?
Yeah, that was the first one. That's a great story. I mean, at some point while I was still working with Chuck, teaching at the symposium, then I started doing a little bit of instruction at the big show, the fly fishing show that's now run by his son, Ben. And somewhere in between those shows, as I'm doing them, Chuck has this little show that's called the Fly Tyers Reunion. And it's held around Seven Springs, Pennsylvania. It's a cool little show because it's at the location where he originally started his first show, where he had people like George Harvey and Lefty Cray and Joe Humphreys, all those, I think Gary LaFontaine, all those, those legends would show up and they would have this great gathering there. So he still to this day runs a show there in the spring. So he's having this show in the spring and, I was able to get a couple of days off of work and I'm at the show. But before that one night of tying, we actually fished. So that people will show up for a couple of days and they'll fish some of the lakes around Seven Springs. And Seven Springs also has this really cool sporting clays course. So they said to us, hey, anyone who wants to, shoot sporting clays, you're welcome to go up at this one time. Justin Sparkling was running the sporting clays at that time. So I'm like, that sounds awesome. I'd love to do it. And at that same event was this guy named Jay Nichols. And I had heard of Jay Nichols. He was like an associate editor at Fly Fisherman magazine. And he started his own little publishing group and he was associated with Stackpole Books. And that was really all I knew with Jay. But, he and I got, partnered up and we're shooting sporting clays together. And when you're at an event like that, and you're just having fun. We're each sharing our story. I'm finding out about him, how he used to guide, how he chases smallmouth, and he loves books. And I'm like, I love books too. So we're kind of sharing our stories about, the classic books like the Vince Marinero book, like In the Ring of the Rise. And I'm telling him how like Every time I see a copy on eBay, I'd buy one. I have like 6 of that book. I don't know why, and we're just sharing these stories and we're going back and forth. And he was very inquisitive and he wanted to know about my YouTube channel and my audience. And anytime we're talking about that stuff, like I get passionate. I mean, I'm really, a share bear on everything when it comes to fly tying and fly fishing. So we just had some great conversations. Now, fast forward a few weeks after the event, and I have my laptop. It's sitting on my kitchen table, and I get this little private message on Facebook Messenger. It's from Jay Nichols. I'm like, oh my gosh, how cool is this? Jay just sent me a message. Jay's really awesome. And I open it up and I read the message, and it's like, hey, Tim, do you know anyone who could write a fly tying book? I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is not for me. And I call my wife. I'm like, Heather, I'm like, check this out. And she's like, Tim, that's awesome. He wants you to write a fly tying book. I'm like, no. He wants to know, like, if I know somebody who I would recommend. I think that's what he's asking. She's like, I don't think so. And then I start saying, you know what? I know what it is. He sent this to the wrong person. He meant to send this to somebody else. This is not for me. So she's like, what are you going to do? I look at the message and I say, I'm just not going to reply. I'm going to give him 2 days. Because I figure in about 48 hours, he'll realize his mistake when whoever didn't reply back. He'll realize he sent it to me. And I think if you right-click delete, you can delete the message. It'll just go away. That's fine. Because in my mind, like, I'm not writing a book. That's not my journey. I'm thinking, like, I'm going to retire from teaching. I'm going to try to take after, like, somebody I always aspired to be like, John Girac, like, even Brook Trout Get the Blues. That was my book that just, man, I fell in love with that book. I ruined that book. I read it so many times. I'll never forget when I met John, he signed it and he was like, Tim, like, I love that you read this book. I can tell you read this book. I love the autographed books that are used, and this one's used. So that was me. I'm like, I'm going to write a fictional book when I retire. Now here comes Jay Nichols just messing my whole plan up. I'm like, this is not for me. And, long story short, I replied to him a couple days later. I'm like, I think I do. And I said, I'd love to do a fly tying book if you're interested. So, he and I had a couple phone calls, and he said, I'm looking for somebody who could write a book for beginner to intermediate tyers. That's a book about modern flies, modern materials, modern techniques to help people get into fly tying, because it's a pretty steep learning curve. I don't want you to do the parachute atoms. Been there, done that. Let's talk about some modern flies. What do you think? And I was like, I would love to do it. So I set about over the next year and a half to create fly tying for everyone. My first step was just like, I need to figure out what flies to tie. So that took forever, just narrowing that down. Then I started writing it, and the writing came really natural. It's just, the words just seemed to gravitate because it's what I knew. It's what I did. I love to fly fish. I love to tie flies. That stuff was easy. And then came the tough part, and that's called macro photography. Because, going back to whenever you're at these fishing shows and you're tying in front of an audience who are looking at you, every thread wrap on a screen, now it's every thread wrap on a page forever. It's always there, and you have to get it right. And there's no trick photography. There's no Photoshop. Every fly in that book is from start to finish, one hook, one fly. And I had to get it right. And I'm asking Jay, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. He's like, you do YouTube. You can do it. I'm like, YouTube is video. That's camcorder. This is photography. And thank gosh, he's such a good mentor, because he was able to really help me dial in my pictures. I would take pictures of pheasant tails and then send them to him. And he'd say, hey, adjust this, change this setting. You need more light here. Here's your background. Your depth is too close. He just gave me such great advice the entire time.
In fly tying, that's the photography and the video is everything. Like, seeing it is the way most people learn, and he is the master at capturing fly photos. I feel like he kind of developed the whole thing, and everyone that does good fly photography today, I feel they either learn directly from Jay or from somebody Jay taught or something like that. Yeah. A big influence on the visual aspect of fly tying for sure.
There's something about it. If you look at the majority of good fly tying books out there, almost every one of them says photography by Jay Nichols. Like, there's a reason.
Or at least he taught them how to do it. Or he
taught that person. He's really good at what he does. I always say I wish he would have done the flies for my book. At the time, I was hoping, like, maybe he'll come and he'll shoot the photography. We'll get it done in one weekend. But I think he just finished shooting one of Bob Clauser's newest books. And Bob had a number of intricate patterns that just had a ton of steps. And I think that was the last book Jay shot, and was like, all right, Tim, I finished Bob's book. I am happy to teach you, but I'm not going to shoot for you. And at the time, I was like, that stinks. He's not going to do this. Now I look back and it's like, he was giving me some of the keys to the kingdom to really just say, all right, you're going to do this yourself. It's going to be tough the first time, but it's going to help you in the future. So, major shout out to Jay there.
It's a great book. I like the modern take on all the flies and the patterns and stuff like that. But I also appreciate how accessible you made it. You made fly tying to everybody. There's a lot of fly fishers that don't fly fish because they think it's too tricky or beyond them or something. You really made it seem accessible and open for everybody.
Thanks.
There's kind of a barrier to fly tying, barrier to entry that's hard to overcome.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you're talking about you got to get a vise, you got to figure out the tools, you have to figure out which materials for which fly. Oh, it's just, I don't know. For anyone out there who's not into fly tying, A, get into it, but B, just take it simple, especially for anglers who already fly fish. I mean, if you're already into fly fishing, you probably know your 3 favorite flies. Just start there and say, all right, I'm just going to buy materials for these 3 flies and just try my best to learn how to tie these 3. And if you just start there, then you can kind of use those as your building block and kind of head off into whatever path you want to take.
Yeah, and you can learn those skills to tie, even if your favorite fly is not in your book.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
You can branch out from there. Yeah. So is fly fishing taking you to some pretty amazing places? You mentioned earlier, like fly fishing travel. Did, that sparked your interest when you were a kid. Did you get there?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was lucky. My parents loved to travel. My grandparents loved to travel. I mean, my grandparents had this trailer. It's called an Avion trailer. It's similar to an Airstream. Just imagine this big silver bullet going down the highway. So they had this Avion. They would travel around the country with all these other Avion trailer owners. And they would take my sister and me all summer long. And we got to just see the country, with my grandparents. Just, oh, God, incredible time. And then my parents, they're big travelers as well. So we would go to Bar Harbor. We would go to the Outer Banks. We would just travel all around, tended to be around water. And then I look back at my dad, too. He was a prolific, like he was almost was going to go to the Olympics to shoot skeet. He was a prolific duck hunter, and he would just travel all around Canada hunting and fishing, and he still does to this day. So I had all these influences of travel. And at the time when I was fly fishing, when I was younger, I knew about destinations, but I didn't know enough about them. I was still, anyone who's in their teens, I'm just trying to catch fish. That's what I cared about. I was at that stage where I'm happy when I'm catching trout. I was great there. And as I'm progressing and I'm going through YouTube, I'm starting to get all, contacts from people, from other outfitters that want me to help them with their social media. Maybe do a YouTube video while I'm there. And it just kind of opened the doors where I had this opportunity to start traveling and finding out a little bit more about various outfitters and destinations. And, fly fishing it's taken me lots of places. I've had a chance to see the West. I've had a chance to travel to various parts in Europe. I now lead 2 or 3 trips a year to Iceland. So it's exposing and bringing me to more and more destinations to not only just catch fish, because we all love to catch fish, but there's just so many great people and so many great cultures out there. And I think, that's one of my draws to trying new destinations. It's not just the fishing, but just to meet new people and just to figure out what their story is. I mean, as many of your viewers may not know, this summer I had a chance to interview you. And, for my YouTube channel, and I'll never forget, as you and I were completing this one video, we were talking about our favorite places. And I remember I asked you, I'm like, well, if you could fish 3 places, where would you go? And there were 3 places I hadn't fished. And I'm hearing you talk so passionately about them. I'm not going to ruin the video for everybody, but I will say one of them was Steelhead up in Canada. And you're talking about it. And I'm listening to you and I'm like, I'm ready to go. Ross, whenever you're ready to go. And I got back and I'd gotten an email from Ben Frimsky, and he had been up to BC that year and he had fished it during a really high water event, and he had invited me, and I hadn't been able to go. And after our interview, I'm emailing him like, hey, if you can go back next October, count me in. I'll see if I can find a way to get off of school, just because there's so many great places to get to.
Canadian Thanksgiving. That's the time when you want to go.
I'm in.
That's my lucky weekend.
Okay, I'm definitely in now.
Where'd you fish in Europe?
Gosh, I've been all over. I had a chance to fish in Italy, and that was really challenging. That would be one of those spots that I wish I would have had a little bit more, not experience necessarily, but probably reached out to different people at the time. There's just places you go sometimes where you're there and you just want to fish what's accessible versus not doing your homework. And I think that's probably my biggest recommendation to others who are thinking about traveling. Do your homework. I mean,
So important.
I'm lucky. I'm able to host trips to these great destinations. But I'll go back and I'll say, if I was out west and I did some content, or maybe I did some YouTube videos with an outfitter and they said, hey, you should host trips here. I kind of looked at it as, I don't think people need me to host a trip to this place. They can probably just book the outfitter on their own and just handle it there. So to me, I wasn't into the idea of hosting trips. But then when you go to places like Iceland, I'm like, wow, it's all private water. There's all kinds of different outfitters and guides. And even, my first trip there, I'm fishing and I'm posting some stuff to my story on Instagram. And one of my friends happened to be in Iceland at the same time. And here we are catching like tons of Arctic char and brown trout, just having like the trip of a lifetime. And I'm messaging him. I'm like, how are you doing? He's like, oh, we got 2 Arctic char today. It was like the best day ever, our guide said. I'm like, oh man. I'm like, are you sure? I'm like, who's your guide? And he would message me and I would show my outfitter, and my outfitter's like, Tim, that's not a guide. That person it's a weekend warrior. They just know Americans are coming over. There's lots of tourism right now. They're just picking up some easy trips on water that would be like sea level water. Like, tell your buddy, maybe call us, consider rebooking the last couple days. So whenever I get to destinations like that, where I can actually, help people have the trip of a lifetime, that's the draw to me. So like I said, just do your homework.
Getting on the right spot is everything in Iceland. Sure. I mean, it's all private. The best stuff's really locked up. And if you don't have the best guides, they don't have access to the best spots. And you're kind of wasting your time in a very expensive country.
That's exactly it. It's like you're saying with Canadian Thanksgiving. It's the same thing. There's a river in the north called the Miracrest River. It's beautiful. I go there and I'm fishing for Atlantic salmon now. That's my current, like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get there this year. But that's my river for this 1 week in July. Like, it's mine. Like, if you want to come and book it, and if you're not on my trip, you're not going to get on that river that week. And I have it for the peak week. So the only access to it is now through me. And which, you look at that from 2 perspectives as an American. Like, one perspective, that stinks. Like, we're so used to being able to go somewhere and fishing water as long as you have a license in that state. But then from the other aspect, there's a reason you go to Iceland. I mean, you want that experience where you have a chance to catch an Atlantic salmon every time you go out. And then there you fish in the morning and in the evening. And so you're expected to catch 2 Atlantic salmon. It's a quantity game. It's not quality. You may not have these giant fish like in other countries, but you have a chance to land a fish every time you go out in that river. And you have that opportunity because of the way they run their water.
Yeah, the way they do it is not the American way.
No,
but if you like the American way, Pulaski, New York.
Oh, that's for sure.
You can go there.
Shoulder to shoulder. They're all yours.
It's a different story.
Yeah.
So let's turn our attention to your most recent work, tying Euro nymphs and other competition favorites.
Sure.
How do you go from a book that's fly tying for everyone to like a super specialized niche that's, focusing on the highly competitive sect of fly fishing?
That's the $1 million question. And I think it probably connects to anyone who wants to write an article for Fly Fisherman magazine. I can just imagine you probably reply to them, like, write about what you know. And for me, that's what I know. In the last 10 years, living in Pennsylvania, that one aspect of that one style that I've been drawn to is European nymphing. I learned about it, gosh, I don't know who was the first person that kind of introduced it in my world, but you just heard this buzz about this thing called Czech nymphing, where you had these anglers that were using this really heavy nymph, something like a scud with tons of weight, just to dredge the bottom. And maybe there were these dropper flies and the fish were eating, who knows what, the dropper, the heavy point fly, but something. And I just kept hearing about this style and how it was being used in these competitive circles and competitive fly fishing around the world. But I didn't know much about it. I didn't know many competitive anglers. I didn't know about that world. And then one day, one of fly fishing's top ambassadors, George Daniel, came out with this book, Dynamic Nymphing, I think is what it was called. And he really just let us all know about, I don't want to say the secrets of it, but just here's how to do it. This is what I know. He put it all down into a book. And it just was this thesis project for him where he just shared everything he knew about it. And it's just amazing to even look back at that book today to know that even what we're doing now, kind of like long lines and micro thin leaders, was almost being introduced at that time in various sections, in various ways. But I don't know, once George introduced it, that was it. I wanted to learn all about this style called European nymphing.
It's well suited for Pennsylvania too. Small streams in Pennsylvania, very tricky trout. It's often close quarters. I think the Euro nymphing really works well in Pennsylvania, especially your side of the state. Actually, this side of the state too, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I didn't know much about it. At one point, I was driving to a fly fishing show with a good friend of mine. His name's Josh Miller. He's the owner of Trout Yeah Guide Service. Josh actually wrote a book called Euro Nymphing, super creative title. And Josh is just this master angler. In fact, he fished for Fly Fishing Team USA, our competitive national team. But at that time, Josh was kind of an up-and-comer. He and I were doing this show together, and we decided we're going to fish our way out. We're not just going to drive straight to the show. So we stop and we're fishing this super popular stretch of water, tons of people, tons of fish, high pressure, and I'm like, we're going to have a blast. We're just going to have a good time. And I'm putting on my waders, and I'll never forget this moment where as I'm getting ready, I'm just tying my boots, and Josh had already by this time put on his waders, rigged his stuff, got into the water, caught 4 or 5 fish, and turned around and looks at me and goes, yeah, they're just not on here. We need to go somewhere else. I'm like, who is this kid? Like, I know him, but I didn't know him that well. I'm like, all right, let's go somewhere else. So he directs us to another spot, and we get there, and he's like, Tim, why don't you lead? So I get my rig ready. I'm still fishing a pretty traditional rig where I have around a 10-foot rod, which I think was a nymphing rod at the time. That's how it was marketed. I had a traditional fly line, a little bit of a longer leader. I think I was fishing an indicator and maybe a fly like a Frenchie, a couple split shot. I just felt confident on that river with that setup. And I caught a few fish. But here comes Josh, AKA the vacuum cleaner behind me. And he is just catching fish after fish. I'm watching him. I'm thinking, what the heck is this kid doing that I'm not? So eventually I ask him a dumb question. What fly are you using? He's like, I'm using like a version of a pheasant tail. It's called a Frenchie. Well, I got that one on. It's not making a difference. So I'm like, how many split shot? He's like, I don't have any split shot. Now I'm like, this is weird. This just isn't making sense. And eventually, he tells me, well, I'm Euro nymphing, Tim. And I'm like, well, how do you Euro nymph? And he's like, well, it's a little bit different. And he's trying to explain it. I'm just not getting it. So finally I say to him, hey, let me cast your rod. Let me just see what this is all about. And I grab his rod. It's around a 10.5-foot 3-weight. He's got this level fly line, but it's thinner than mine. He's got this super long leader, like 15-foot, really long piece of tippet, and this fly, like a size 16 with no weight. And I go to cast this. And the best analogy I have is it was like casting just, I don't know, an almost al dente noodle, like an almost al dente piece of spaghetti. The rod just was flexing. It was just all weird. It didn't make any sense. I could barely cast this thing out, and that was Euro nymphing. And I knew I couldn't do it yet, but I knew it was highly effective. And I just spent the next couple years just invested all in everything I could find out about that, just looking into it. I still consider it to this day just an arrow in my quiver of fly fishing styles. I mean, I still love dry fly fishing, emerger fishing. I love throwing articulated streamers. But man, this is just such an effective style that, I fell in love with, learning about the intricacies of it and realizing that people like Devin Olson, Lance Egan, they've been doing it for years and trying their best to mimic the European style and figure out what's the best approach based on the water they're fishing. And here I am listening to podcast after podcast, just taking it all in and realizing, man, there's such a steep learning curve to this, just like anything else. I mean, I'll never forget, I would listen to a podcast. I'm pretty sure it was the Ask About Fly Fishing podcast with Roger Maves. And he would interview Devin, and I would listen to the podcast, and I'd go out and I'd try the techniques. And I'd figure them a couple things out. And then about 3 months later, I'd go back and I'd listen to the podcast again. And I'd realize, oh, you do this next. And just like everything else in fly fishing, there's a stepping stone, and you get to that step. And then you realize there's another step, and there's another step. And with Euro nymphing, there's just multiple steps to get to whatever level you want to get to.
So there's been a lot of books written about Euro nymphing. You decide to do one just on tying the nymphs, like the niche within a niche within a niche.
Sure, yeah.
And, just on the face of it, it seems like an odd fly tying book because when you look at a Euro nymph, they're incredibly simple looking. Yeah. So what is there to know about tying these simple looking flies?
Ross, that's a great question. And which I'll say now for like the audience, now even take it one step further. My book was released in January of 2025. It was announced in November, like around Thanksgiving. That's when it was announced. It sold out before it was even released. And then we got into the second printing, and the second printing is going to sell out too. And it's like, how are we selling out a book that's just on like Euro nymphs? To me, that's kind of the thing that really boggles my mind too. And I think it was the approach that I took to this book and this style, because you're saying you hit the nail on the head. Euro nymphs are so incredibly basic. If I said to you, what is a Euro nymph? I think people have trouble just saying, defining that word, because to me, it's this fly that's tied with a set amount of weight to get down to whatever level the fish are feeding at. It's tied in the round, so it looks the same from all 360 degrees. And it's tied basic enough that it could represent just a myriad of fish food, of insects, of nymphs, of larvae. And that's really what Euro nymphs are. But whenever you start to kind of dive into this, we'll just pick, I don't know, one of my chapters is all based around perdigons. And a perdigon is a really fast sinking fly. It has no appendages. It's tied on either a jig hook or a down eye nymph hook, slotted tungsten bead. It's got this real slender tail where like 3 to 5 fibers of coque de leon. It's got a very thin body. It could be thread body. It could be tinsel. It's coated with a UV resin. It has a black wing case. But when you look at this thing, it looks so basic, but it sinks just like a pellet. In fact, the Spanish word for perdigon, whenever it's translated, means pellet. Because that's how it sinks in the water. It just gets to the bottom in a hurry. So you look at something like that, and I'll never forget the first time I saw one, like on Instagram. I'm like scrolling, and I see this fly, and it's a perdigon. I'm like, that's a really easy looking fly. I can't believe, A, a fish would eat it, and B, it takes more than 10 seconds to tie. And I start tying them, and I realize there's some complexity to tying patterns like this. There's some nuances to this, just like everything else in fly tying. Just when you think you have it figured out, you're like, oh, geez, you got to use really thin tactical thread. You got to watch all of your thread wraps. You got to pick the right materials and just all those aspects of it. So, yeah, to speak to your point, whenever I look at the book and I'm like, well, no one's done a book on Euro nymphs yet. Is there enough content there? And the short answer is, yeah, there was.
I think it's super cool. What do you think of this analogy? Like in the world of fly casting, there's people that cast a lot, but the ones that are really proficient make fewer back casts, fewer false casts. There's a lot less to it, but they get more accomplished. And with your book and with Euro nymphs, I feel like there's a lot less material, a lot less wraps, but there's a lot more thought that goes into it, and a lot more gets accomplished. Simplicity is pretty amazing.
Yes, you're 100% on. I never put that analogy together, but yes, you hit the nail on the head. And something that I heard from some of the individuals I interviewed for this book. So we can talk briefly about how the book came together, but it's the notion of thin to win. That a lot of these anglers, whenever they're looking at this from a competitive aspect, because they're using these flies in competitions, or some of them anyway, that if they want them to sink down to that desired depth, they want it to get there in a hurry. So the thinner they can make the flies, the faster they can sink through the water.
But the fish still have to see it. Absolutely. It has to catch their eye.
Yeah,
What's one of the most surprising techniques you learned when you're doing all these interviews and putting the book together?
Wow, there's a few. I mean, now when I look at the book, kind of the premise behind it was that I wasn't just going to create a book that's a fly tying book on Euro nymphs. That was my original thought. But once I spoke with Jay Nichols, the publisher, he kind of steered me in a different direction where he was like, Tim, I still want you to write this book, have these 15 flies, but I want you to interview some of the top anglers in the world today. And that sounds simple enough, but he kind of charged me to say, go out there and interview these people and pick their brains and ask them the right questions, then put it all together at the end. So I had a chance to interview people like Devin Olson, member of Fly Fishing Team USA, Lance Egan, Pat Weiss from the United States. If I think about some of the international anglers, we had people like Howard Croston. He was a gold medalist from the UK. He has a documentary on him right now from Fulling Mill.
Isn't that cool?
Him. Oh, it's so cool. I just saw him in the Denver show. Just amazing to watch kind of his progression, just how he is now analyzing and putting himself into that situation. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I really like that whole thing. Howard's an amazing personality, and never has so much thought gone into trout fishing. I don't know about never, but like this generation.
No,
He's kind of the man.
I'll tell stories about Howard. There's no doubt there. But then I'm getting people like Lubos Rosa. He's another gold medalist from the Czech Republic. I decided I wanted to also interview members of the youth team. So I have people like Noah Shapiro. He was a member of the Fly Fishing Team USA youth team that, is now living in New Zealand. So I was able to interview him. I found connections that I was able to interview other anglers from around the world. There's an individual who fishes for the French team. His name's Gregory Jugularet. And no one from the French team speaks to anybody else because there's a reason they're always one of the top two teams. They don't tell anything. And I got him.
They're secretive?
No, they're so secretive. No, Spain's pretty secretive, and France is easily one of the most secretive. They win every year. I mean, everyone wants to hear about what they're doing.
That's surprising to me because I have so much exposure to a lot of the Team USA guys, and they're just always sharing
Without a
and
doubt. But remember, for
helping everybody.
For anglers in the United States, at least this is my perspective now after interviewing everybody, in these other countries, in Europe, they almost treat their fly fishing team kind of like we treat bass anglers in our country, where they're kind of held on a different pedestal than fly fishermen. So whenever you look at it like that, the sponsorships and just so many other, competitive, I don't want to say competitive angles factor into it, but they want to always remain at the top of their game, and they don't want to share anything with anybody else. They're completely different than at least the way that I conducted the interviews with the Americans. I mean, even people who are on the Masters team, which is like our veteran team, somebody like Pete Erickson, who's a gold medalist, he shared so much information. But now I go back to Gregory Jugularet. He shared a little bit, not a lot, but he shared just enough to kind of say, all right, I'm going to give you a few little things here, Tim. You got to connect the dots. But it's even like that with some of the members of our American team, where they'll give you some information, and I'm not saying it forces you to read between the lines, but you got to do your homework too. So I think you would ask the question, what are some of my takeaways from this book? For sure, one of the biggest takeaways is the current generation of these top anglers from around the world, they are not dredging the bottom. They're not fishing Euro nymphs and mop flies and just dredging along the bottom, catching fish like that are acting like suckers, like acting like vacuum cleaners. They're not. They're fishing flies a lot higher in the drift than people think, but they're doing that with really light flies. So I went into the book thinking, we're going to tie, a lot of like Paragon style flies, and sure, a lot of them fish Paragon style fly, but they're fishing it in real small sizes, like 18s, 20s, and even size 22 Paragons, which is really minuscule. Another takeaway is whenever I look at it from a fly tying perspective, they don't just tie them on jig hooks. Like sure, they're using jig hooks on larger patterns, but on those size 16 and smaller, many of these anglers are using down-eye nymph hooks with a slotted tungsten bead. So that bead, they're still able to invert the bead on the hook, so the mass of the bead is above the hook shank. So if possible, that hook is still going to invert in the water and act like a jig hook. But if you're fishing a size 20 or size 18 down-eye nymph hook, now you don't have that 45-degree angle of the jig hook stealing some of the gap. So they're finding ways to get the gap back. Some of the European anglers are telling me they're even bending the hook eye with pliers just to get more. They want as much of that gap as possible because the wider the gap of the hook, the more fish they can hook.
I like that. Get the gap back.
I need a T-shirt with
Mind
that
the
on
gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was getting like just tidbits like that, just all kinds of different things. I mean, you spoke about the notion of fish seeing the fly too. I mean, there are a couple funny things that came out of the book. I mean, one question I asked them all, what's your opinion of tails on flies? Do you think a tail on a nymph really matters? Almost every single angler said absolutely not. It doesn't matter. I don't think the fish reacts to it. I don't think having tails matter. Not at all. Then I asked them a follow-up question. Do you put tails on your fly? Absolutely. Well, why? And they're like, it's a confidence thing. It was almost more for them than for the fish. And another question I asked them was like, what's your favorite bead color? Because of course, these are bead heads, the majority of nymphs. So when we start diving into it, every angler had their own favorite bead color. And some of them even dialed it down more so. Like Josh Miller was like, if I know there's more brown trout in the water, I want to fish copper beads. If there's more rainbow trout, I'm going to fish silver beads. But then he would talk about, well, when I start fishing, I might have a copper as my point, a silver bead as my dropper. And then if I start catching more on the silver, maybe I might put both of them silver. But then if I don't catch as many fish, maybe the copper is drawing them in, but then they took the silver. So just the way that these people were thinking was just incredible. Though one of the anglers, oh gosh, I might forget which angler it was that said this now. I believe an angler, Ollie Bassett from New Zealand, he started wondering because he was fishing such small patterns. He's like, are they seeing the fly or are they just eating the bead? So here he is in New Zealand in a pretty technical spot, and he decides he's going to just tie up some flies with nothing but beads and a little bit of thread behind the bead and see what happens. And he makes 3 casts and he catches around a 20-inch rainbow trout. And he's like, nah, that couldn't have just happened. So he's like, let me see if I can catch another. So he just a fly with basically nothing but a bead. He makes like 5 more casts, and sure enough, he catches another really large rainbow in New Zealand. He's like, Tim, it just ruined me because now I am thinking I'm doing all this analyzing and all these complexities of Euro nymphs. I just caught 2 really tough fish on nothing more than beads.
He almost took the fun out of it.
He did.
But what bead? Like you were talking about Josh and these guys, is it copper or brass or silver? In New Zealand, it's got to be black.
Every angler had their different beads. I'd like to look in the book and tell you what Ollie's were, but I'm pretty sure his was not black. There were a few that liked black beads, either black nickel or matte black, because personally, I like matte black. That's like all of my good flies are on with matte black beads. Howard Croston likes black nickel. That's one of his go-to colors. And he even says, one of the quotes that I used in the book, he said that so many people tell him fish don't like black nickel beads. And he looks at them and says, well, I've caught about 6,000 fish on them so far. So if you don't want to use them, you don't have to. But I think that speaks to my favorite line that I use about fly fishing is that this is one of those sports that we each get to choose our own path. And it's all right. If you don't want to use black nickel beads, you want to use gold, go for it. You know, it's really up to you. And I think that was one of the things that I shared with this book was that you have all these high-end anglers and fly tyers and fly fishing from around the world sharing all this information that I'm able to put it in this book, but you still get to pick your own path. That I'm still going to break this down into digestible pieces and all this macro photography and all these tips and these confidence flies. And I put it all together in a really easy to read, I don't want to say a manual, just it's a book. I mean, that's what it is. You can turn to any page and start reading, but you still get to pick whatever path you want to pick. And if you want to go all in, like you have the option. I'm showing you, this is the all in path. If you want to just completely go down that path. But you know, the last thing I'll say about the book is that I didn't want to just make it Euro nymphs. That's the title, tying Euro nymphs, but it says, and other competition favorites. And I realized these anglers, they're not just using nymphs. I mean, a lot of them have used dry flies to win championships. So I have a section on dry flies, especially for dry droppers. And I have a section on jig nymphs not jig nymphs, on jig streamers. Because so many of these anglers, like jig streamers, it's a really big deal. It's been a big deal for a number of years. And I think they just get overlooked. So I thought, well, if all these anglers are telling me like, hey, they fish them in competitions, they fish them whenever it's high or off color or muddy water, they're using these jig streamers, I better have a couple in this book as well. So I really tried to find a way to put a bunch of information in this book. So it wasn't just a fly tying book for Euro nymphs. It was a tying book. It had nymphs in it, it has streamers, it has dry flies, but then also has an investigation and just a examination into what Euro nymphing is today. I mean, that's how I tried to write it.
It's all the flies that these top anglers are using, and they're catching tons of fish. So that's going to spark a lot of interest. No wonder you're selling them out. Yeah. People always, the age-old question in fly fishing is, what fly are you using? And it's awesome to find out what these guys are using, whether it's competition fishermen or Renee Harrop or whoever it is, You want to know what the guys catching fish are using.
That's probably one of my favorite parts of the book. The first interview I did was with Devin Olson. He's a good friend of mine. He wrote the introduction for the book for me. And so I wanted to start with him. So I did this Zoom interview with him. He's got a beautiful kitchen, by the way. I'll never forget. Like he turns on his Zoom and I'm like, Devin, you have a great kitchen. I think he's up in Wyoming right now. And he's like, yeah, we just got this house. We start talking. And we just dove all into every aspect of Euro nymphing that I could think of. And then I asked him a question that I hadn't set up. And I was like, hey, Devin, if you could go anywhere in the world and fish for trout or char with 5 flies, what would your 5 flies be? And he just rattled them off just like that, just like you and me talking. And I decided to keep that question. I asked everybody. And at the end, I was first using it selfishly to say, these are my 15 flies for the book. Then I realized these aren't the 15 flies that these guys are using. Let's cut 5 of these flies and add their 5 flies in, because there were some flies that had some overlap. Then I realized I had to add variations. So I have 15 and then 15 variations. So I'm like, I got 30. But then I went back and I'm stuck with these lists. And I'm like, what am I going to do with all these lists? I'm like, I think there's a lot of value here. And I'm not going to write another book with just the list. So I decided to include in this book, you turn every 10 or 15 pages and you'll have, Tim Flagler's list of his top 5 confidence flies, and Josh Miller's top 5 confidence flies, and Lance Egan's. So every one of these anglers also gave me their top 5 flies. They just rattled them off, and I have them listed. And then I asked them to speak about one of those flies, and I just put some quotes about one in there as well. And to me, I don't know, I still flip through and I'm like, what are George Daniels' 5 flies again? I look and I read them like, oh yeah, this is probably why George likes this fly so much. And it's cool just to look and see, like, at this moment in time, like, here are the top anglers in the world, and these are the flies they're throwing.
That is good information. That is hot. Yeah. So besides the world of little tiny competition flies, or generally small, what other kinds of fly fishing are you into?
Man, I definitely love to fly fish for muskie right now. I mean, there's something about, I don't know, I think I heard you say this once. There's something about fly fishing for fish that have teeth. And I just love that aspect of it. I mean, I had an opportunity to fly fish for muskie years ago with a good friend of mine, Bobby Kish. And Bobby Kish is a fly fishing guide in Indiana, Pennsylvania. And he has a day job as well, but he's known around this area. He fishes in this trout club, and he gets a lot of anglers into a lot of fish. And he invited me to fish for muskies one day. And that invitation just drove me crazy, going down this path to just start to, I don't know, figure out just another aspect of fly fishing that I didn't think I'd get into. It's like, I got to get a 12-weight fly rod. I got to get different fly lines. I got to get these giant patterns, these game changers, and tie these flies with lots of material to them, and just drive all over the place and try my best to catch and, or to hook and fight and land a muskie. And man, that thing has just been incredible over the last few years.
Talk about polar opposites in terms of fly tying. I honestly, I've never spent a whole day just musky fishing, but I come across them all the time while I'm fishing for smallmouth bass, and I cannot catch those bastards. Honest, I've never caught one. Yeah. I'm 0 for muskies. Is it super cool?
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool. I mean, we've talked a little bit about mentors here. I think that's what you need. We got to get you a mentor. So number one, Bobby and I are going to get you on the water one day. When I say Bobby, I mean Bobby. So Bobby, if you're listening, we're going to have to get Ross out there. There's just something about the aspect of fly fishing for them that I think is really cool, because when Bobby first invited me fly fishing for these things, he didn't tell me this, but he didn't have any fly fishing gear for them. And we get out there and we're on this lake, and as we're getting ready, I look over, I'm like, where's your fly rod? He's like, well, I don't fly fish for them. I'm going to watch and see how you do it. I'm like, well, how am I supposed to learn? But he told me about their behavior. He told me about the colors of flies. He told me about the retrieves. He really helped to just at least get me to understand their behavior, where we're fishing for them, and why they're going to react in a certain way, and how to really encourage that reaction. So he was excellent with that. And we started fishing this one day, and it was the first day we had ever spent fishing together, chasing muskies. And I won't tell you the exact number because I have it written down, or it's in my iPhone and my notes somewhere. But I'll never forget, at the end of the day, we kind of were comparing things, and we looked at his numbers, and he had around 8 muskies follow, which was a pretty darn good day. He had 8 muskies follow, and he maybe had one that came into the figure 8. And on my side of things, I had over a dozen, maybe 15 muskies that followed my fly that day. And I had a number of them that came into my figure 8. And I had one, as I was figure 8ing, it surged and it ate the tail of my fly. Didn't attack my fly, but it ate the tail. I didn't have a hook in the tail. I didn't know at the time. I didn't have a stinger back there. So I immediately grabbed a pair of pliers, put on an O-ring, grabbed one of his treble hooks, and I was ready. I had a few more follows, but I never had another eat. So, here I am, we're finishing the day. And I knew they were tough. I was really dejected because we had opportunities. I just, I didn't control what I could control at that moment. So we're driving back, and he's getting ready to drop me back off at my truck, and Bobby got really agitated, just upset, super out of his character. And I'm like, Bobby, what's going on, man? Are you okay? And he's like, Tim, I got to be honest with you. Like, whenever I invited you, I had no intention of fly fishing, but I knew you're a pretty good angler, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, and I wanted to kind of show you just how good of a musky angler I was. but now we fish all day and you basically double the amount of fish that I saw fly fishing. And I realize now, like, that's it. I got to spend thousands of dollars. I got to get a fly rod. I got to get lines. I got to get and he's like, I got to just completely invest. And sure enough, now, I don't know how many years later this is that we've been fishing together. He has completely gone down the fly fishing rabbit hole for muskies. He's caught muskies now on a fly. He and I have chased them. We do 1 or 2 trips together a year. And I think we've hooked and landed muskies, I think, on 90% of our trips. So whenever I say, like, you need a mentor, like, Bobby is my mentor. He's an incredible musky angler. He wins tournaments all the time. Some fly fishing only tournaments too. But whenever I have a chance to fish with somebody like him, I take advantage of it. Just absorb everything he tells me.
Big success rate.
We do.
That's incredible.
For sure. Yeah, we've been lucky. I mean, he puts us into some really good spots. He has a system. He keeps very meticulous notes, which is incredible. But he also knows his waterways. He fishes them as much as anybody that I know. I mean, I told you he's a fly fishing guide, but he really just guides, like March, April, maybe a little bit into February, maybe a little bit into May, and that's it for trout. And then after that, he is just 100%, he calls it ski season. He's just all into for these muskies. And he fishes every weekend as much as he can. He'll just chase them around multiple states and just do everything in his power to locate and catch them. He looks at numbers. He looks at water temperatures. He looks at the moon. Whenever we're booking our trip, there are so many factors that goes into it. I mean, the last trip we took this October, we did not have the moon on our side. And I knew he looked at it and said, like, this is going to be tough for us. Like, we're hoping we're going to catch a fish this weekend. But he's like, Tim, this could be one of our toughest, weekends we're going to have. And, you're out there early, like, it's still dark. So you're trying to maximize, sunrise, sunset, those two, money times. We didn't get a fish at sunrise the first day. And I'm like, ooh, we're basically now just casting and trying to be on edge for the next, 10 hours or 12 hours until you get to sunset, because there could be a fish, but you're probably not going to catch one or see another one. And sure enough, like midday, we were moving from spot to spot. I made a cast, had a fish fall, had a fish eat 40 feet from the boat. Just everything worked out. We netted that fish. We got it in. We're like, all right, we're up 1 now. Let's just see how the rest of the weekend goes. So he's just one of those anglers that every time I'm with, I just feel confidence. Like, we're gonna have fish. We're gonna have an opportunity. You just got to be ready and do everything else.
When you say the moon wasn't right, what's the good moon? You want a new moon, or?
Don't quote me on this, Ross, but I believe, like, that weekend we were fishing, it was like a full moon. And he did not like it to be a full moon. I know, I looked at it as like, if it's because it's a full moon, the fish have an opportunity to eat all night, so the day is not going to be as productive.
That's my theory.
I think that was, so I can't remember which moon he looks for. I'd have to ask him and look through my notes with him to double check that. But I know that time we were fishing, it was one of those, it was a bright moon night. 'Cause I remember I showed up when I got to his camp. We were at his camp this time, and I had a 12 weight. It was a new Lamson rod that I was throwing. And I was like, I need to test cast this rod, but I had a super nice moon to cast. I'm out in front. I'm like, oh, I can see everything. He's like, yeah, this is not good for us that you can see everything right now. So
yeah, I don't like that for even just predators like brown trout on bright full moons. I feel like they're feeding all night and just chilling out in the daytime.
Yeah, for sure.
Bad mojo. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming in and talking to us about your books. That was awesome. Can you share with us your contact information, how people can follow up with you, get in touch with you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the easiest way, if they go to my website, it's troutandfeather.com. There's a contact button there. They can click and send me an email. If they're into social media, they can either look for Trout and Feather or Tim Cammisa on pretty much any social media that's out there. I love to just connect on all sorts of forums and, just help people along their journey.
Even TikTok.
Even TikTok.
You're going to have to help me on TikTok, I guess.
I will be happy to help you. I only know this much about it. I remember I teach 12-year-olds. My favorite TikTok story is that I was with my son. His name's Angelo. He's in 3rd grade, and I brought him to one of those trampoline parks. So we're jumping. We're just having a good time. And he's like, Dad, this kid that we're jumping with, he knows you. And I'm like, oh, is it a former student? He's like, no, he said he knows you from TikTok. And I'm like, nah, I don't think so. So, about half an hour later, this little kid comes up to me, and he's like, are you that famous TikTok fisherman? I'm like, I don't know. I guess I am. He's like, I think I follow you. I'm like, I don't think you do. And sure enough, he followed me on TikTok. So I don't know. Let's
so cool.
let's hope we have a future fly fisher there.
That's right.
Yeah,
Future
100%.
fly fisher and fly tire.
100%.
That's awesome. You're doing good stuff. Thanks for
Thanks,
coming
Russ.
in.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.